Sawadee-ka. Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. Today is our Pali Canon and English study group, and we're studying the words of the Buddha. We're in this book that's titled The Realms of Existence. This is volume 11 of our book series, and today we're going to be exploring chapters 131 to 140. Next week, we're going to be finishing up the book by going all the way up to chapter 148, but today we're going to do these 10 chapters of 131 through 140. And the way that we do this program is I invite students who are in Zoom to be able to volunteer to read a chapter. Then I'm going to share some teachings on that. Then I'm going to open up to any and all questions that you guys have, whether you're in Facebook, YouTube, or in Zoom. You can ask questions by putting those in the comment section, or in Zoom, you can raise your hand electronically, unmute your microphone, and ask any and all questions that you like. And you can even volunteer to read this way as well. So if there's anyone in Zoom who would like to volunteer to read our first chapter, if you would just electronically raise your hand and then unmute your microphone, you'll be able to read these first chapters. So welcome to all of you guys. Nice to see everyone in class today. Looks like Samantha has volunteered to read this first one. So go ahead, ma'am.
Abandoning being capable of destroying discontentedness. Monks, without directly knowing and fully understanding form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, consciousness, without becoming free from strong feelings towards it and abandoning it, one is incapable of destroying discontentedness. Monks, by directly knowing and fully understanding form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, consciousness, by becoming free from strong feelings towards it and abandoning it, one is capable of destroying discontentedness. Monks, abandon desire and craving for form, for feeling, for perception, for volitional formations, for consciousness. Thus that form, feeling, perception, volitional formations, consciousness will be abandoned, cut off at the root, made like a palm stump, obliterated so that it is no more subject to future arising.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. So here, the Buddha is highlighting the 5 aggregates. We might call these the 5 criteria or the 5 elements that determine what is a living being and what isn't a living being. We've explored these in this program before. So what the Buddha is saying is that without knowing and fully understanding these 5 aggregates, you wouldn't be able to destroy discontentedness, meaning you'd be incapable of attaining enlightenment. So this is an important aspect of developing your practice to be able to make your way to enlightenment. You wouldn't even be able to get to the first stage of enlightenment without understanding the 5 aggregates. The Buddha talks about this in other places, but without eliminating the craving to them, you wouldn't be able to get to enlightenment itself. So in order to be able to eliminate the craving to something, you need to understand first what it is. Of course, you guys understand craving, desire, attachment, the mind's longing, yearning, and chasing after the objects of your affection. And the mind does that with any number of countless things. It's not the object itself that the mind is experiencing the craving, desire, attachment. It's inside the mind. So an individual could actually have a longing, yearning, a craving for a bottle of water. That's how the mind actually works in the unenlightened state. It can crave and desire anything and everything. So let's just give an example like a mobile phone. If your mind is longing, yearning for this mobile phone to be permanent, as long as you have your mobile phone, you feel great. But if somebody steals it, or you lose it, or it breaks, or you misplace it, your mind will be shaken up by this. You might have fear or frustration or agitation. It's not the phone itself that is causing this. It's the way the mind is longing, yearning for it, craving for it to be permanent. So oftentimes people can readily understand that the mind can long and yearn for external things, material objects like a phone, a car, a boyfriend, a girlfriend, money, the weather, any number of things. Like I mentioned, even a bottle of water, the mind can long and yearn for it. It's not the object itself, it's the way the mind longs and yearns and craves for it to be permanent. Well, because that's pretty straightforward and people can see that, and the Buddha makes that clear in his other teachings, there's also these 5 things that the mind can long and yearn and crave to be permanent, and it can cling to these things. These are the 5 things that make a living being, and they're not so obvious that the mind could actually crave and cling to these. This is the physical form, the feelings, perceptions, volitional formations, and consciousness. The physical form is like the physical body. If a mind was craving and clinging, longing, yearning for this body to be permanent, and you got happy and excited when this body appears youthful or appears the way you want it to appear. Then when you see that the body has changed, maybe you've gotten a pimple or a mole or a wrinkle or a gray hair, or you're losing your hair, now the mind is shaken up by that, right? That's from the craving and clinging to this physical form. Then an individual can crave and cling to feelings. Maybe an individual clings to the pleasant feelings of happiness or excitement, wanting that to be permanent. And now in the unenlightened state, those feelings are actually impermanent. So now when you crave and cling to the excitement and the happiness, when the mind goes to the sadness, it's kind of like you're sad because you're sad, or you're frustrated because you're frustrated, right? Because the mind is longing, yearning, and craving these feelings to be permanent. Or there's certain perceptions, like your views and opinions. A very popular one here is people tend to crave and cling to their views and opinions about politics. But you can have other perceptions that the mind clings to as well. It's not just politics. But if you were clinging to the perception, what a perception is your views and opinions about the world that may or may not even be true. If you were to cling to your perceptions, this is going to motivate unwise decision making, and that's going to produce unwholesome results. So if an individual had certain perceptions about how they thought the world should function, certain political views, maybe a perception about certain ethnicities or cultures or genders or things like this, the mind is going to make unwise decisions, and it's going to experience discontentedness based in clinging to its perceptions. And the same thing is true with volitional formations or choices and decisions. If you were going to go on a trip somewhere and you planned this 6 months in advance, and your mind was longing, yearning to go on this trip, and maybe you've put down a deposit, but now as you get closer, maybe things have changed. And now as things change, it would be wise to update your decision, perhaps, and make a new decision. But because the mind's longing, yearning, and craving and so excited to do this thing, when things have changed, the mind's uncomfortable to let go of that decision. And now maybe someone's financial status have changed and their financial income has changed. And now as they get closer to this trip, they can't afford it any longer. And either they don't go to the trip and they feel miserable because they're not going, or maybe they choose to go and they take out a loan and they go into extensive amounts of debt just because their mind is craving and clinging, unwilling to let go of their choice and decision that they made 6 months ago. Because with impermanence, things are going to be constantly changing, and you need to be able to let go of any decisions that need to be updated. Because if you just make a decision 6 months in advance and all this change has happened and you still implement that decision, then that means you could be implementing a very unwise decision. So you need to be able to account for impermanence and not cling to any choices and decisions, and be willing to move on and update your decision. And that's going to ensure that you're implementing a wise decision in every single situation, because that's how you're going to get to enlightenment, is by producing only wholesome Dhamma through making wise decisions. And then the consciousness itself, this is like the self-identity that the mind can cling to around your culture, your ethnicity, your sexual orientation, your job or occupation, a nationality or something like that. Your mind can cling to these things, and now you get pleasant feelings when maybe somebody's talking fondly about your nationality. But then when someone's talking in degrading or disparaging ways, you experience painful feelings. So in order to be able to eliminate the clinging to these things and actually eliminate the strong feelings associated with the clinging to these things, you need to first directly know and fully understand what they are. So if you haven't yet understood the 5 aggregates or these 5 criteria, it's important to make sure you understand what these are. And then once you understand what they are, you can be observant with your mind. Whenever your mind is longing, yearning, and clinging to any of these things, you can train your mind to abandon that. You would like to get to the point where your mind is no longer clinging to these things, and you've been able to abandon any kind of craving or clinging to them, because it's through abandoning them that your mind will actually then be able to get to the point where you've cut off at the root the cause of the discontentedness, and it's no longer subject to future arising. So you first need to understand what these are, and then through all the other teachings of the Buddha, you can understand how to cut off and let go anytime the mind is clinging to any of these things, and thus you can eliminate the discontentedness associated with the mind clinging to these 5 aggregates. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this particular chapter. This is chapter 131. Okay, it looks like Vibhav has a question. Go ahead, sir.
Thanks, David. So when we say that we have to understand consciousness, that is understanding the mind, and so what does it mean to say that we have to understand consciousness? Like that we are polluted by the 10 fetters?
Yeah, understanding the consciousness is to understand that what consciousness is the mind, and it's polluted, yes, with the 10 fetters, and that it clings to certain things like a self-identity, because those things are not so obvious to the unenlightened mind because of its lack of wisdom, that the mind's even doing that. We're indoctrinated, and our mind is conditioned from birth to cling to all kinds of things like, I am American, I am a father, I am a entrepreneur, I am a kind person, I am this, I am that, right? I am a resident of Thailand, I am this, I am that. The mind can cling to any number of these things, and now the mind can get triggered by any of these things. So you need to be able to understand that the consciousness is the mind, and it's going to cling to a self-identity. But yes, there's other things about the mind that you can understand as well, like the pollutions and the 10 fetters and all those other things as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, let me see if we have any questions anywhere else on either Facebook or YouTube. I don't see any questions there. So let's move to the next one, which is chapter 132. Is there someone who would like to read this?
I can read it.
Okay, go ahead, Vibhav.
There is no you there, then Bhaiya. When for you there will be only the seen in reference to the seen, only the heard in reference to the heard, only the sensed in reference to the sensed, only the recognized in reference to the recognized. Then Bhaiya, there is no you in connection with that. When there is no you in connection with that, there is no you there. When there is no you there, you are neither here, nor there, nor in between the two. This is the end of stress. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Vibhav. So here, this is the Buddha helping you to understand the universal truth of non-self. He's pointing to that, right? So that's why this chapter is coming after what he said previously, because you need to be able to understand the consciousness. You need to be able to understand that the mind's going to cling to the physical body, that it's going to cling to the identity in the mind, thinking that this is who you are as a person. Like, I am this, or I am that, or I am this. And the mind's going to keep trying to cling to these identities around your culture, your ethnicity, sexual orientation, your nationality, your job or occupation, or any number of different things that the mind can cling to. Whenever the mind thinks I am, then that is the mind clinging to a self-identity. So in some political scenarios like I am Republican, or I am Democrat, or I am an independent. And now when you hear all Republicans or all Democrats or all independents are this or that, now the mind gets angry and frustrated because maybe someone's talking in a degrading and disparaging way. And if you identify with that as who you are, now you're frustrated or angry or irritated. Or say you have a certain job or occupation, like I am a police officer. And now as long as you're doing that job, you feel great. But when you retire, when you get injured, you no longer work there, or maybe when you get fired or you get laid off, or maybe even you just quit your job and you move to something else. Now your mind identifying with I am a police officer. Now the mind isn't comfortable with driving this taxi or doing something else because the mind is longing, yearning, and feels like less of a person. It doesn't feel whole anymore. So the Buddhist teachings is that there is no you there, that there is no self. And you need to be able to train the mind to be able to realize non-self, is strip away any of these things that the mind is clinging to as who you think you are as a person. There is a body and there is a mind, and they've come together for this existence. And we refer to this as a person or a human being, but it's important that you don't cling to any of these things as who you think you are. So the Buddha is giving some guidance here where he says there's only the seen in reference to the seen, only the heard in reference to the heard, only the sensed in reference to the sensed, and only the recognized in reference to the recognized. Meaning that these are just things that happen, right? There's things that you see, things that you hear, things that you sense through your sense base, and certain things that the mind recognizes, but you shouldn't cling to any of those things as who you are. There is no you in connection with these things. Any of the things that you think or hear or see or any of these kinds of things, none of that is you. That's what the Buddha is saying to you. None of that is actually you. When there is no you, when the mind is realized non-self, there is no you there, right? When there is no you there, you, meaning the mind clinging to an identity, are neither here nor there nor between the two. In other words, the mind is completely realized non-self. And just this is the end of stress. This is where discontentedness is going to be diminished, because as long as you have the concept of a you here and you're clinging to this, you can't be permanently peaceful and permanently joyful, because the mind's clinging to, say, I am an American. And now when people say something favorable about that, you get these pleasant feelings of happiness, excitement in others. But when people say something degrading or disparaging that's disagreeable or unfavorable about Americans, now the mind is experiencing the painful feelings associated with that. So as long as you hold on to an I, or you think there is a you here, you can't get to the end of stress. And the word stress is being used here, but this is really discontentedness. So someone can experience anger and frustration and irritation and annoyance and any of these discontent feelings as long as the mind is clinging to a you and who you think you are as a person. So by understanding intellectually that there is no self, reflecting on that to be able to see the truth, and then gradually practicing to strip this away, this is the end of discontentedness, and what's going to help you to minimize your discontentedness by getting rid of that personal existence view. And then when you get rid of all the other fetters, that's where the mind's completely experiencing the peace and joy of the enlightened mental state. So there is no you there. There's nothing there that you can point to, or you can grab onto, or you can cling to and say that this is who you are. Because as soon as you do that and you cling to this thing, thinking that this is who you are, you'll be happy as long as that's intact. But then as soon as it changes, and it will change because of impermanence, now the mind's lost and confused. Feels like less of a person. It feels unwhole. And that's where the anxiety and the stress and other discontentedness arises. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this particular chapter. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So now I'll go to the next one, chapter 133. Is there someone who would like to read this? Okay, Samantha, would you mind reading this one and the next one as well?
That's fine.
Thank you.
Do you want me to do them in succession?
Yeah, just one right after another.
Okay. The conditioned. Monks, there are these three characteristics that define the conditioned. What three? An arising is seen, a vanishing is seen, and its alteration while it persists is seen. These are the three characteristics that define the conditioned. The unconditioned. Monks, there are these three characteristics that define the unconditioned. What three? No arising is seen, no vanishing is seen, and no alteration while it persists is seen. These are the three characteristics that define the unconditioned.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. So remember, the teachings of the Buddha are explaining to you the way the world is, because by understanding the way the world is, you'll awaken to that wisdom, meaning you'll cultivate that wisdom, and now you can navigate the world more peacefully. But as long as you don't understand the way the world is, you're navigating the world with this lack of wisdom, this confusion, misunderstanding, the delusion, or some people refer to it as ignorance. So one of the things that the Buddha teaches you very early on in your journey is that the world is constantly changing, that there's conditioned objects that arise, that change, and that fade away. And here's his words that you can see it, where he says an arising is seen, a vanishing is seen, and while it's existing, persisting, there's an alteration or a change, right? So there's this arising, there's this changing, and then there's this fading away. This is called a conditioned object. And everything around you that you can see, hear, smell, taste, anything that comes in contact with the body, or any thoughts or ideas that go through the mind, these are all conditioned objects. They're constantly changing. And this is so vitally important to understand about the world around you, because the unenlightened mind, with its lack of wisdom of this, will crave permanence. It's craving for things to be permanent. Even when you understand this intellectually, the mind will still crave permanence because it's not well trained. So you can understand that things are constantly changing, and you can independently verify that. Because remember, the teachings of the Buddha aren't based in belief. You would like to independently verify every single aspect of his teachings. So here he's helping you to be able to see that there's these three characteristics that he's referring to as conditioned. And sometimes he calls them conditioned objects. And a conditioned object is anything that you can see, hear, smell, taste, anything that comes in contact with the body, or any thoughts or ideas that go through the mind. These are all conditioned, meaning they will arise, they will change, and they will fade away. And now what the unenlightened mind is going to do with the lack of wisdom of this is it's going to crave permanence, and it's going to crave things to be permanent. And now when the mind gets what it wants, like say it's sunny outside, the mind will experience pleasant feelings like happiness, excitement, elation, thrill, exhilaration, euphoria. Based on the condition that the sun is there, the mind in its conditioned state as an unenlightened mind will experience happiness. But now, because the mind is basing its inner feeling of happiness based on a condition, and that condition is not permanent, the sun now changes to rain, and now the mind doesn't like this because it's craving permanence, and now it experiences the painful feelings of anger, sadness, frustration, and others. Because the mind is conditioned in the unenlightened state, it has these conditions of the 10 fetters that are causing it to form inner feelings based on a condition. And now the mind craves this permanence. And the only thing that's happened from the sun to the rain is change. That's all that's happened. Or if the mind gets really happy and excited when your bank account balance is up here, based on that condition, the mind is now going to experience the pleasant feelings. But this is a conditioned object. Your bank account balance is a conditioned object. It arose, it changes, and it fades away. So now when it changes and it goes down, the mind craving permanence, it is going to experience painful feelings like anger, sadness, frustration, or others. But there's also things that are called unconditioned objects. The Buddha says all conditioned objects are of a nature to decay. They are impermanent. They are constantly changing. But he didn't say everything is impermanent, because there are things called unconditioned objects. Unconditioned objects do not arise, they don't change, and they don't fade away. They are permanent. And by the time you get to enlightenment, the enlightened mental state is unconditioned because you've removed the conditions of the pollutions of the mind, and now the mind is in the unconditioned mental state where there's no longer any conditions in the mind that are causing discontentedness. Discontentedness is conditioned. It arises, changes, and fades away. But by the time you eliminate the causes and conditions that are producing that, those 10 fetters, the mind is now purified. It is now unconditioned. Now the mind will experience permanent mental state of peace, calm, serenity, and contentedness with joy, as well as all the other qualities that we talk about in terms of enlightenment. So, self is unconditioned because the mind's been purified of all the conditions that are causing it to experience conditioned feelings. So now with the unconditioned mind, there's no arising, there's no changing, and there's no fading away. Same thing is true about the natural laws of existence that the Buddha taught. They do not arise, they do not change, and they don't fade away. So the natural laws of existence are unconditioned. This is why his teachings are timeless. What he taught 2,500 years ago is just as applicable today as it was 2,500 years ago, because these natural laws haven't changed. Now, the books and people's memories and what people are thinking about the teachings, that has all changed because those are conditioned objects. The books are conditioned, they arise, change, and fade away. People's memories are conditioned, they arise, change, and fade away. But the natural laws themselves don't change. They are unconditioned. So that's why you like to get back to what the Buddha actually taught, so you can see very clearly what he did teach and what he didn't teach. And that's what's actually going to lead to your enlightenment. And having purified your mind of all the causes and conditions that are producing conditioned feelings, now the mind is unconditioned, and you will experience the unconditioned mental state of enlightenment, which is a permanent mental state. So these are two aspects of the world that an individual needs to understand. Conditioned objects change, and unconditioned objects do not. So conditioned objects arise, change, and fade away. Unconditioned objects do not arise, do not change, and do not fade away. They are permanent. So the Buddha never said that everything is impermanent or everything is changing. All conditioned objects are changing. And the way that I say this in the classes that I teach is everything in the world is impermanent, meaning everything that you can see, hear, smell, taste, everything you touch with the body and any thoughts or ideas that go through the mind. But this enlightened mental state and these natural laws, which you can't touch, you can't see with the eye as a physical form, you can't hear them, you can't smell them, you can't taste them, you can't touch them with the body, and they're not thoughts or ideas. By the time you actually get to enlightenment, these teachings are deeply rooted in your mind, and you've been able to deeply understand them through the cultivation of the wisdom. And that wisdom that you cultivate to get to enlightenment is permanent. It's unconditioned. So let me know what questions you guys have here on these two different aspects of the world that the Buddha is teaching about conditioned objects and unconditioned objects. So it looks like Alberto has a question. Go ahead, sir.
Yes, I have a question regarding the relation between non-self, conditioned objects, and conditioned objects, and the five aggregates. Can we then conclude that there is no self because the five aggregates are conditioned objects?
Yes.
Thank you.
That's why there's no self, because we can't cling to any of this stuff as who we are, because it's all conditioned objects. Each of those five aggregates, they're all conditioned objects. Okay, let me see if we have any other questions anywhere. I don't see any questions. Okay, so now let's go to the next one, which is chapter 135. Is there someone who would like to read this one? Okay, looks like Vibhav. Go ahead, sir.
Where earth, water, fire, and wind find no footing. Once Kevata and the order of monks, the thought occurred to a certain monk. I wonder where the four great elements, the earth element, the water element, the fire element, and the wind element, are eliminated without remainder. And the monk attained to such a state of mental concentration that the way to the heavenly realm appeared before him. The monk attained to such a state of mental concentration that the way to the heavenly realm appeared before him. He went to the heavenly realm of the four great kings and asked the questions. When none of them could answer the question, the monk went to the 33 gods, who said, "We don't know, but Sakka, ruler of the heavenly beings, may know." Sakka told the monk to ask the Yama heavenly beings, the Suyama, the Tusita heavenly beings, the Santusita, Nemanarti, Sunimitta, Paranamitta, Vasavati heavenly beings, Vasavati, Brahma's associates, and all the way to the great Brahma. The great Brahma wanted the answer and finally said the heavenly beings believe there is nothing Brahma does not know. But the truth is he does not know where the four great elements cease without remainder. It is the monk's fault that he did not ask the perfectly enlightened one. In the end, the monk went back to the perfectly enlightened one. So that monk, as swiftly as a strong man might flex or unflex his arm, vanished from the Brahma world and appeared in my presence. He prostrated himself before me, then sat down to this one side and said, "Venerable sir, where are the four great elements, the earth element, the water element, the fire element, and the wind element, eliminated without remainder?" I replied, "Monk, once upon a time sea-traveling merchants, when they set sail on the ocean, took in their ship a long land-sighting bird. When they could not see the land themselves, they released the bird. The bird flew to the east, to the south, to the west, to the north. It flew to the zenith, overhead, and to the intermediate points of the compass. If it saw a land everywhere, it flew there. But if it saw no land, it returned to the ship. In the same way, monk, you have been so far as the Brahma world searching for an answer to your question and not finding it, and now you come back to me. But monk, you should not ask the question in this way. Where are the four great elements, the earth element, the water element, the fire element, and the wind element, eliminated without remainder? Instead, this is how the question should have been put. Where do earth, water, fire, and wind find no footing? Where are long and short, small and great, fair and foul? Where are name and form wholly destroyed? And the answer is where consciousness is quieted, immeasurable, all radiant. That's where earth, water, fire, and wind find no footing. They're both long and short, small and great, fair and foul. The name and form are wholly destroyed. With the elimination of consciousness, this is all destroyed. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Vibhav. So what this individual is asking the Buddha is, where is it that this cycle of rebirth ends? Like, how do you end the cycle of rebirth and continuing to be reborn over and over and over again? The way that he's doing that is he's asking about these elements of earth, water, fire, and wind. Whenever you see that they're talking about these four elements, they're talking about the physical body. This is how they describe the physical body 2,500 years ago, is through these four elements. Where today we might describe it as atoms and cells and molecules and things like this, that we have scientific discoveries that we've made since 2,500 years ago that we describe the physical body in these ways. But during the lifetime of the Buddha, and even now in traditional medicine, they will still describe it through these four elements. So what the earth element is all the solids of the body, like the teeth and the bones and the nails and the hair and things like that. These are all the solids of the body. The water element is any of the fluids in the body, like tears and pus and saliva and urine and blood and things of this nature. The fire element is any of the temperature associated with the body, typically associated with digestion, but the temperature of the body. And then there's the wind element, which is the movement of things through the body. So where the blood is the water element itself, the movement of the blood through the vein is called the wind element. Or the feces itself that's in the colon, this is the earth element, but of course it has other elements in there as well. But the movement of that through the colon is the wind element. So when they would diagnose medical situations, it would be like a depletion of the earth element, a increased water element, a neutral fire element, and maybe an increase in wind element, right? And this would mean a certain collection of symptoms to them. And then they would apply certain herbal remedies and other things based on these things, bringing the earth element up or down, or the water element up and down, and so forth and so on. So whenever you see them talking about these four elements, it's always in reference to the physical body. You can also know that from down here, where the Buddha is talking about name and form. Whenever you see name and form, this is also referencing the physical body. There's details that the Buddha shares in Dependent Origination explaining exactly what name and form is. But what I suggest you do is just think physical body whenever you see them talking about name and form. That'll help you to be able to understand what they're asking about and what they're discussing. So here at the beginning, this individual who's ordained is going to all these different places trying to find an answer of where the physical body finds no footing, where it is eliminated, where it's no longer going to experience rebirth. And then ultimately this being comes back to the Buddha and starts asking the same question of where is it that this physical body is eliminated without remainder? And the Buddha says, the way to actually ask that question is, where does this physical body not find any footing, meaning become established, right? And where it's wholly destroyed. What they're talking about is, how do we ensure and how do we figure out how to ensure that we don't experience rebirth? And what the Buddha ultimately gets to is the way that this physical body doesn't come into existence is through the elimination of consciousness. That if we eliminate the consciousness, then there won't be a continued rebirth. So in this life, there is a physical body and there is a consciousness. It's come together for this life, and we call that a person. But if you extinguish the causes and conditions that are going to produce the next consciousness, then there won't be a rebirth. So just like a fire has logs on it, and those logs are considered the fuel for that fire, and they send off sparks that are carried by the wind, and when that spark lands, it ignites a new fire. It's a completely new fire, but it's based on the old fire. The same thing is true about the consciousness. That if this consciousness that you currently have at the end of this life has craving, desire, attachment, that longing, yearning, if it still has that in the mind, that's the spark that's going to lead to the formation of the next consciousness. And now with that next consciousness, it's going to need to find a body. So when there's an egg and a sperm that comes together, like all of us came together with our mom having the egg and our father having the sperm, well, there needed to be a consciousness that came into that in order to be able to now have a living being. But if there's no consciousness that comes into that egg and sperm, then there is no living being. There is no continuous rebirth. So by eliminating the causes and conditions that produce a consciousness, you will eliminate rebirth. And you learn about this through the teaching of a dependent origination, which is in volume 5, chapter 14, where the way to eliminate the consciousness is to purify the mind, eliminating its ignorance, its unknowing of true reality. By doing that, you can then eliminate the causes and conditions that are producing this continuous rebirth. So here, the Buddha is just getting to the heart of the matter and saying by eliminating consciousness, you'll eliminate rebirth. And he's saying it through these kind of questions that this person is asking. But if you look at all of his other teachings and everything else that he teaches, you can understand that it's the craving, desire, attachment that's causing the mind to continue to be reborn over and over and over again. The Buddha talks very clearly and explains that craving, desire, attachment is the fuel that leads to consciousness to be recreated. But of course, the only reason why craving, desire, attachment is in the mind is because of ignorance. If there's ignorance in the mind, it's going to then lead to a new consciousness because the mind is lacking wisdom of how to eliminate its cravings. So therefore, craving is going to be the spark that now leads to the next consciousness. And now that consciousness is going to need to find a physical body. So if you're interested in getting to enlightenment and eliminating rebirth, you would train the consciousness, you would train the mind, you would purify the mind of all the causes and conditions that are producing the next consciousness, which namely, through dependent origination, you can see that it's ignorance. And that's why on this path to enlightenment, you're always taught to cultivate wisdom. Cultivation of wisdom is what's going to lead to the elimination of the unknowing of true reality or ignorance. And then having done that, you can purify the mind of craving and anger, which is now going to lead to a purified mind, an unconditioned mind. So now with an unconditioned mind, there is no causes and conditions that are going to lead to the next creation of a consciousness or a next rebirth. You need to have a condition that is going to now cause an effect that leads to the next rebirth. But if you've purified your mind of all the conditions, if you have an unconditioned mind, there is no condition that's going to lead to the next rebirth. And this is how you can understand it. So let me know what questions you guys have here. Remember, you can put those into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. Okay, I don't see any questions anywhere. So we're going to move to this next chapter, which is chapter 136. Would someone like to read this? Okay, Yihang, go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you, Teacher David. In this phantom-long body, I say, friend, that by traveling one cannot know, see, or reach that end of the world where one is not born, does not grow old and die, does not pass away and get reborn. Yet I say that without having reached the end of the world, there is no making an end of discontentedness. It is in this phantom-long body endowed with perception and mind that I proclaim the world, the origin of the world, the elimination of the world, and the way leading to the elimination of the world. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Yihang. So here, the Buddha is using the world to refer to discontentedness and ultimately perhaps even the end of this world. What's going to end humanity is everybody getting to enlightenment. And some people can't even fathom that humanity would come to an end. But we know humanity is going to come to an end because we're conditioned. We are impermanent. We arose, we change constantly, and we fade away, right? Oftentimes people are craving permanence and wanting humanity to be permanent, but we understand that that's not true. But no one but those who have seen the truth and understand the universal truth of impermanence would even think that humanity would ever come to an end. But that's exactly what's going to happen at some point. So as humanity gets more and more enlightened and less beings are being reborn, this is how ultimately humanity would come to an end, right? So here the Buddha is saying that one cannot know, see, or reach the end of understanding how to eliminate discontentedness without having first gotten to the point where you've understood what the Buddha is pointing to here is the Four Noble Truths in a way that is less direct than what he typically does. What he typically does is he explains it very clearly. He says, this is discontentedness, This is the cause of discontentedness. This is the elimination of discontentedness, and this is the way leading to the elimination of discontentedness. But here, he's describing it a little bit differently, that it's through understanding what he taught, that this is how he is explaining and proclaiming the world, the origin of the world, the elimination of it, and the way leading to the elimination of it. And the same thing is true about discontentedness in the mind. So it's through traveling to understand, meaning taking this journey to grow and learn and develop your mind to cultivate wisdom, that one will then come to understand these things. So he's using this analogy of traveling the world, that you wouldn't be able to understand the end of the world without reaching the end of the world and traveling to that destination. And it's the same thing that's true, that you wouldn't be able to end your discontentedness and eliminate that without having first traveled in this journey to enlightenment, to fully cultivate the wisdom in this journey, to be able to then eliminate the causes and conditions that are producing discontentedness. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this chapter. Okay, it looks like Vibhav has a question. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, David. I have a question around how this is going to be stated here. So, Buddha is basically saying here that without having reached the end of the world, there is no. Sorry, I think he's trying to say that without having reached the end of the world, he's not able to see the end of the world. That's what I get out of this. And he's saying that without having reached the end of the world, where the world ends, he can also see there is no making an end of the discontentedness. So there'll always be discontentedness unless everybody gets to enlightenment. And we also know that everybody will not get to enlightenment because there'll be very few people who actually go down that path, right? Because it's rare for people to go down the path, to start doing, will start learning, and it's rare for actually following the path and staying dedicated to it, and then it's rare to get to enlightenment. So from this statement, it seems that there is no end of the world, because there will always be some discontentedness. And they're saying that if you are basically, there is at an end of the world if everybody follows the Four Noble Truths. Is I'm reading it right? Or?
The world's going to come to an end regardless of whether the world practices the teachings of the Buddha or not, whether there's massive amount of enlightened beings or not. The world's going to come to an end. It's just a matter of how, right? Because we're all impermanent, we arose, we change, and we're going to fade away, just like every other conditioned object. But what you said about how there's very few people who learn and practice the teachings, that's true. Like during the lifetime of a Buddha, they're going to be able to help countless people get to enlightenment. But in terms of the total population of the world, it's a limited number, right? Because not everyone's going to understand that this person's a Buddha. Not everyone's going to be dedicated and diligent to learn and grow and develop. You won't find it anywhere in the Pali Canon, but it's well understood in Buddhist communities that what the Buddha taught is that his teachings were going to reach the entire world, and that more and more beings would get to enlightenment. But it wouldn't be during his lifetime. So during the lifetime of a Buddha, a very limited number of people get to enlightenment, but that is still countless numbers of people. It's a massive number of people, but just in terms of the total population of the world, it's a limited number. But then if the teachings are deeply rooted and shining in the world, then we can get to a point where now they are shared more and more widely, and more people can get to enlightenment. And we're at a point in time now in history where this is actually possible, because during the lifetime of the Buddha, there wasn't an international language for the teachings to really get well rooted in a sense for the international community to be able to get to enlightenment. But with the English language, with ease of travel, with the internet, now the teachings can really shine in the world, and over multiple generations, countless people will be able to get to enlightenment. And this is ultimately what we would be able to see as the teachings get more and more restored in the world. What the Buddha is talking about is that the world is going to come to an end. that, but he's also kind of, this is a retelling of how he typically describes the Four Noble Truths. So there's like both of these kind of messages embedded in this one teaching.
Okay, then can you also clarify the first statement? You're saying that just by traveling, one cannot know, see, or reach at the end of the world where one is not born, does not grow old or die, does not pass away or get reborn. So it seems to be saying that there's always be a time then that one is born, they grow old and die, and then get reborn.
Yeah, what he's saying here is just by traveling, right? Just by kind of roaming around and traveling the world, you can't know the end of the world and the end of the cycle of rebirth and where one doesn't get reborn by just traveling the world. But instead, it's through learning, growing, and developing that you would be able to do that. So yet I say, without having reached the end of the world, there is no making an end of discontentedness. So as you travel the world, you need to cultivate wisdom and now reach the end of the world where you fully understand the wisdom of the world. And by understanding the wisdom of the world and how the world is constructed, now you can make an end of discontentedness. But just by purely traveling the world, one cannot know, see, or reach the end of the world where one is not born. So you need to be able to cultivate wisdom. It's not just through traveling that one would experience the cultivation of wisdom. There's actually real work, dedication, and diligence to cultivating that is needed to be able to get to the end of the world, meaning you fully understand the world. So this is this discourse and others that you need to be able to understand what the Buddha taught that helps you to understand this discourse. It's not just this discourse alone.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. And it looks like Samantha and Yihang have a question. Go ahead, Samantha.
Thank you. So this teaching is saying that there will be an end of the world when everyone becomes enlightened. But that seems in contradiction to the Buddha's undeclared teaching of the end of the world. So are you interpreting it differently?
So there's the world, which some people describe as like the galaxy, the universe, and all these different things. But then some people describe the world as like the earth that we live on, right? So here, what I suspect that the Buddha is describing is the earth, the world that we live in, because we know that the earth has arisen, it changes, and it fades away. But the galaxy, the universe, the entire outer whatever is out there that we don't even fully know right now, that's what the Buddha is saying. He doesn't declare whether it's finite or if it's infinite, these kinds of things. But in terms of what we know about the earth being the world here, we know that this is impermanent. And that's what I suspect the word world is being used here.
Okay, thank you very much.
You're welcome. And then Yihang, you have a question?
Yes, thank you, Teacher David. I was wondering, you said regardlessly the world will come to an end in terms of how many people practice the teaching of the Buddha. Then I was thinking because only enlightened being will cease their existence. So if someone's not practicing the teaching of the Buddha, which they are most likely unenlightened, and then they will continue existence, how could a world come to an end with their continuing existing?
Yeah, so what we're talking about here in terms of the world is the earth and humanity's existence on the earth. This is going to come to an end, regardless of whether people learn and practice the Buddhist teachings or not. It'll either end in massive destruction with everybody essentially probably killing each other and, fire and brimstone of, massive evilness and unwholesomeness in the world. Or as people learn and practice the teachings of the Buddha and the world becomes more and more wholesome, we will see that occurring, right? And through that, the world would come to an end because more and more people would get to enlightenment and there wouldn't be rebirth.
But then only if the world goes in the other direction, which is very destructive. But theoretically, no matter how destructive this is, then these beings are still continuing existing, right?
Yeah, they would be in the cycle of rebirth, but at some point, that is all going to come to an end, right? The cycle of rebirth is impermanent itself, right? So even that itself would come to an end.
Okay. Maybe I understood. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Yeah. These are the kind of things that, like, I can say these things, but you have no way of independently verifying it. That's why I very rarely even talk about these kinds of things, because there's no way for you to independently verify what I'm sharing. And what I teach is something that you would always be interested to independently verify. But what I'm sharing here is what you can understand. But then in terms of verifying it, if you do the work in this life to get to enlightenment, you won't be here when the world comes to an end. So that would be ideal. All right, Vibhav, you have another question?
So can you just explain the last thing you said about the cycle of rebirth coming to end? Like, dependent origination is like the highest laws, right? It's like a natural law.
Mm-hmm.
So the natural law is unconditioned, and it always exists. How will the cycle of rebirth come to an end?
Yeah, the natural laws themselves are not arising, changing, or fading away, but the beings in the cycle of rebirth, the beings in the world, we are all impermanent. We're arising, changing, and fading away. Exactly how the world ultimately comes to an end, like I mentioned, I see two different options. I see massive destruction, or, more and more wholesomeness and a lack of beings being reborn. So therefore, everybody will be kind of flushed out of the cycle of rebirth. But exactly how that occurs, I wouldn't be able to give you any insight on that. And you wouldn't be able to independently verify it either.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. You're welcome. Okay. Looks like Mayuli has some questions here on Facebook. Teacher, when the world ends, what will happen to those that are not enlightened? Did the Buddha mention anything about that? No, he didn't mention anything that I've seen. Or according to the sutta, we all will get to enlightenment before the end of the world. That would be ideal. That's what I would prefer to see occur. But whether that occurs or not is up to each individual being to make their own decisions. But the Buddha doesn't ever give any insight into this. This is an interesting topic, right, that a lot of people enjoy talking about. And that's why I tend to not talk about it, because there's no way to independently verify it. But if each individual person focuses on their enlightenment, that's what is going to ultimately help yourself and help everyone around you and help all of humanity, because the wisdom of how to get to enlightenment comes into the world more and more. And while the teachings of the Buddha, the goal isn't to eliminate humanity, that is what would ultimately occur. And that's okay, but oftentimes people are clinging to the existence of humanity and not wanting humanity to come to an end. But when we come to understand the universal truth of impermanence, we know that humanity is going to come to an end. It's just a matter of time. And how is it going to occur? Our role, if we choose, is to be able to learn and practice and train our mind, get to enlightenment. And now, as we have that wisdom and other people are interested in that wisdom, we can share it with them. And that'll be highly beneficial for all the beings after us. And that's what I'm involved in, is helping people to be able to learn these teachings so that now more and more beings can understand how to get to enlightenment. And then the world will just become more and more of a peaceful place. Okay, I don't see any other questions anywhere. So now let's go to this next one, which is chapter 137. Would someone like to read this? Okay, we've got a couple of people here. Oh, Yihang, you didn't. Okay, so we'll go to Samantha then, since Yihang put her hand down.
But because there is an unborn, unbecome, unmade, unconditioned. There is, monks, an unborn, unbecome, unmade, unconditioned. If there were not that unborn, unbecome, unmade, unconditioned, there would not be the case that escape from the born, become, made, conditioned would be identified. But precisely because there is an unborn, unbecome, unmade, unconditioned, escape from the born, become, made, conditioned is thus identified. The born, become, produced, made, conditioned, impermanent, conditioned of aging and death, a nest of illnesses, perishing, come into being through nourishment and the guide that is craving, is unfit for excitement. The escape from that is peaceful, permanent, a sphere beyond conjecture, unborn, unproduced, the sorrowless, stainless state, the elimination of stressful qualities, stilling of fabrications, and completely peaceful. There is, monks, an unborn, unbecome, unmade, unconditioned. If, monks, there were no unborn, unbecome, unmade, unconditioned, no escape would be discerned from what is born, become, made, conditioned. But because there is an unborn, unbecome, unmade, unconditioned, therefore an escape is identified from what is born, become, made, conditioned.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. So here, what the Buddha is saying is that because there is a born, right, become, made, and conditioned, that there's this unborn, right? There's this unmade, there's this unconditioned. So what he's saying is because there's this unenlightened mental state where you're in this complete cycle of rebirth over and over and over again, there is actually an escape for that, right? There's an escape that's going to lead to this permanent mental state down here, where you can see the Buddha's talking about this permanent mental state that is peaceful, right? The born, become, produce, made, conditioned, and permanent, this is all unfit for excitement. What the Buddha is saying is that if you cling to these conditional experiences and existing in this world, now when you get that excitement, right, we can understand through his other teachings, when you get that excitement that you're clinging to this existence, now as you get close to death and you realize that this existence is impermanent, that's where the painful feelings come in, because the mind's not getting what it wants. It wants this permanent existence, but yet it's in an impermanent world. So the Buddha is saying it's unfit to take excitement in these conditioned experiences, namely birth, right? If you are born, then you're going to experience sorrow, grief, pain, displeasure, and despair, right? Over and over and over again. But there's an escape for that. And getting to that escape, that's peaceful, impermanent, right? Sometimes people doubt whether the Buddha actually taught that enlightenment is permanent. I share this all throughout all the classes, but you can see it here in his own words, that the escape from this conditioned experiences and living in life, living in existence is conditioned. You can see that he's saying, oh, no, enlightenment is peaceful, it's permanent, right? That this is the sorrowless, stainless state where the elimination of stressful qualities, right? The mind's completely peaceful, right? That's what enlightenment is. So because there is this unborn, this enlightened mental state, this unconditioned mental state, because that exists, there is an escape from the conditioned. And that's what the Buddha taught, is how to escape out of these conditioned experiences so you can get to the point where the mind is unconditioned, experiencing the permanent peace and permanent joy. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this chapter. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So now let's move to chapter 138. Would someone like to read this? Okay, Yihan.
Thank you, Teacher David. Final knowledge is achieved by gradual training. Monks, I do not say that final knowledge, wisdom is achieved all at once. On the contrary, final knowledge is achieved by gradual training, by gradual practice, by gradual progress. And how does there come to be gradual training, gradual practice, gradual progress? Here, one who has confidence in a teacher visits him. When he visits him, he pays respect to him. When he pays respect to him, he gives ear. One who gives ear hears the teachings. Having heard the teachings, he memorizes them. He examines the meaning of the teachings he has memorized. When he examines their meaning, he gains a reflective understanding of those teachings. When he has gained a reflective understanding of those teachings, enthusiasm springs up in him. When enthusiasm has sprung up, he applies his will. Having applied his will, he investigates. Having investigated, he strives. Purposely striving, he realizes with the ultimate truth and sees it by penetrating it with wisdom. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Yihan. So in the previous discourse, the Buddha is saying, hey, there's this enlightenment that you can experience where the mind's unconditioned and it's permanently peaceful and joyful, right? And this is going to help you escape from these conditioned experiences where the mind's experiencing anger and sadness and frustration and all these other feelings. Well, this one, he's explaining to you how to actually do it. Final knowledge is enlightenment. Final knowledge is where you fully understand the path to enlightenment completely and fully. And here, the very first opening sentence that he shares is this final knowledge that it takes to get to enlightenment, this enlightened mental state, is achieved by gradual training, gradual practice, and gradual progress. And this helps you to break up that myth that you hear frequently that the Buddha sat under a tree, he meditated, and instantly got to enlightenment. Because if that's what you thought was actually occurring, you probably would put a lot of time into meditation, and only be meditating, right? And now someone might be meditating for extensive periods of time, but they're not learning all the other teachings that they need to actually get the mind to enlightenment. You can't actually meditate your way to enlightenment. So thinking that the Buddha sat under a tree, he meditated and got to enlightenment that way, leads the mind through this ignorance or this unknowing of true reality, thinking that that's all you need to do is meditation. And there's plenty of people out there in the world that are just meditating, thinking that somehow miraculously there's going to be this light switch that goes off and they're going to instantly get to enlightenment. While meditation is important and you wouldn't be able to get to enlightenment without meditation, you wouldn't be able to just meditate your way to enlightenment. So it's this gradual training, gradual practice, and gradual progress. And you don't believe that. Instead, you look at your life and you see anything that you've ever accomplished in life has been the same way. Whether it's learning to read, write, or speak a certain language, it's been gradual training, gradual practice, and gradual progress. If it's some job or occupation where you have certain skills and abilities, it's been gradual training, gradual practice, and gradual progress that has led to you being able to do that. So enlightenment is exactly the same way. It's this inner growth, this inner development. And understanding that the Buddha took from the age of 29 to 35 to get to enlightenment, those 6 years, you can see that it wasn't instantaneous. It was gradual training, gradual practice, and gradual progress. And that's what he's saying here in this, opening line here. So now, understanding that you need this gradual training, gradual practice, and gradual progress, the Buddha helps you to be able to understand that you're going to need a teacher, because you're not going to be able to get to enlightenment by yourself. It's only a Buddha that would be able to get to enlightenment by themselves without the help of any teachers or any guides. Everybody else in the world's going to need teachers and guides. And the last Buddha that the world is currently aware of existed over 2,500 years ago. So it's very rare that a Buddha exists in the world. And they have a certain quality of mind that not everybody has, and which allows them to be able to get to enlightenment on their own without the help of any teachers or any guides. So you're going to need to have confidence in a teacher. So you're going to need to visit a teacher, right? And the Buddha gives you guidance on observing the teacher's mind and seeing if they're muddle-minded. If their mind is muddled, it means that they lack concentration, they lack focus, they lack clarity. So if someone's lacking focus, concentration, and clarity, that means that their mind is still polluted. And then that means that they haven't fully purified their mind yet. So he helps you to be able to see that it's wise for you to kind of observe a teacher and what is the condition of their own mind. Can they speak about the teachings with ease? Do they understand them inside and out? Can they expand upon the teachings and go beyond just the standard discourses? And if so, then the Buddha says, okay, this person is potentially enlightened, right? Because you don't see any anger and sadness and frustration, agitation, annoyance. Any of those things have been eliminated from the mind. So by visiting a particular teacher, and here the Buddha is using him, but there could be a female teacher too, right? You could have confidence in this person because you've observed their mind and you see that they're practicing these wholesome qualities. Their moral conduct is wise, that their mind is focused and concentrated. And now when you visit that person, the Buddha teaches you to pay respect to them, right? Because if anybody's going to accept you as a student, they're doing that out of the kindness of their heart. They don't want anything from you. They don't expect anything from you, but instead they're there to guide you, right? They're not gaining any benefit from you. Instead, they're there to help you. And they're doing that out of their loving kindness and compassion. So the Buddha teaches you to pay respect to a particular teacher that you're going to ultimately end up learning from. Then the Buddha talks about giving ear. He talks in other teachings where he talks about listening to the teachings with an eager ear, or active listening is probably what we would call it today. You're going to need to give ear to this teacher. where you actively listen and eagerly learn what it is that they have to share. Then, upon giving that person ear or actively listening, you hear the teachings. And then as you hear those teachings, you memorize them. Having memorized the teachings, you need to investigate them. This is where you examine them, right? You're not interested in just believing the teachings. You need to be able to examine the teachings. As you examine those teachings, learning them intellectually, you then need to reflect on those teachings to independently verify, are they true or are they false, right? And now when you start reflecting on those teachings, if they're the true teachings and you're gaining this reflective understanding, there can be enthusiasm that springs up in the mind. Oh my goodness, these teachings are true. Wow, right? There can be this enthusiasm, this ambition that arises up in the mind. And now as this enthusiasm is rising up in the mind, you apply your will towards actually integrating them into your day-to-day life and actually practicing them on a day-to-day basis. And now you further investigate the teachings, because this is an iterative process, right? You're not going to be able to just learn something, reflect on it, and practice it perfectly right from the beginning. You're going to need to do that, learn, reflect, and practice, but then you're going to need to investigate some more, right? And examine some more, reflect some more, integrate the teachings into your life some more. This is the striving that one does. And now, through purposeful striving, this is where you realize the ultimate truth, getting to final knowledge. And you can see through penetrating the teachings that you can independently verify the teachings. Not only intellectually have you learned them, not only reflective understanding where you've independently verified them, but now you practice. And now when you're practicing and you're eliminating the pollution of the mind, and you see the condition of your mind and your life improving, your personal and professional relationships are just blossoming, and everything's becoming more and more easy for you. There's no longer stress and difficulties and struggles. You will get to the point where you have wisdom and you know the ultimate truth, that indeed these teachings lead exactly where the Buddha said they do, to this enlightened mental state. So he's walking you through the process that, hey, this enlightenment is not quick. It's going to take some time. It's gradual training. And here's the way you're going to get that gradual training, is through spending time with a teacher, through learning the teachings intellectually, through reflecting on them, and through practicing them. This is what is going to lead to final knowledge. So any questions here on this chapter? Remember, you can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. So Mayuli in Facebook is asking, teacher, did the Buddha mention if he learned or have memory of his previous lives, ever learning the teachings, or he discovered it in that lifetime? He definitely talked about his previous lives and that he had been reborn countless times. Whether he actually talks about having learned those teachings in a previous life, I don't recall anything like that. But what a Buddha or a person who's going to become a Buddha will have is the ability to remember all their previous lives, and they're going to remember countless details about those lives and their current life too. So there's certain wisdom, like you learned some wisdom on your own in this life. Like you probably learned, I've seen you bake brownies, right? Or what do you bake? You bake different things, right? Like I'm sure you learned some of this by yourself, right? And now that's certain wisdom that you've cultivated, right? In a regular average human being has ability to cultivate certain wisdom on their own, but then they need teachers for other things. But in terms of the path to enlightenment, an individual is definitely going to need a teacher unless they're going to become a Buddha. But nonetheless, there's certain wisdom about this world that you've cultivated on your own. Well, if you can imagine doing that over multiple lifetimes and remembering all those lessons that you've learned, that's what a Buddha does to be able to get to enlightenment in their last life, is they put together all that wisdom in their last life to be able to now accumulate all that wisdom over multiple lives and apply it in one final life to be able to get to enlightenment. So a regular average human being doesn't have this capacity to be able to remember these countless details of their current life and their previous lives. So the Buddha would have accumulated wisdom over multiple lifetimes, but whether or not he actually studied the teachings like under a previous Buddha or not, I haven't seen anything like that, but it's just him accumulating wisdom over multiple lifetimes and then applying it in his last life. Looks like Arvind has a question. Go ahead, sir.
Hi, good day, Teacher David. I have a question with regards to one who is enlightened. How that enlightened one would guide another person. Would someone who's enlightened be able to identify the weaknesses or the obstacles that a disciple is facing, maybe by seeing his past lives or understanding the karma that he has that is posing as a hindrance to his progress? Would someone who is enlightened be able to see and guide a student along those lines?
An individual who needs to get to enlightenment today has certain obstacles in their way today, certain mental defilements and pollutions. And an enlightened being would be able to see those very clearly in another person's mind, even when they're not seeing it themselves. It's not about looking at someone's past and figuring out that, because the past is in the past. It's done and over with. And whatever one is experiencing today in the present moment, yes, it's an accumulation of what's happened in the past, but you don't need to be able to see the past in order to be able to give that person guidance and help today, because you're looking at the condition of the mind today based on its pollutions today. And that's what's going to help you to overcome any obstacles or hindrances that are in the mind, is by looking at the mind today.
Okay, thank you, Teacher David.
You're welcome. Okay, let me see. Sometimes, Arvind, a lot of people put a lot of significance on the past, but that's not, what's going to actually lead to one's enlightenment. Okay, so now we go to chapter 139. It looks like maybe Vibhav is volunteering to read that.
Seeing non-self with correct wisdom. Monks, form is impermanent, feeling is impermanent, perception is impermanent, volition, formations, choices, decisions are impermanent. Consciousness is impermanent. What is impermanent is discontentedness. What is discontentedness is non-self. What is non-self should be seen as it really is with correct wisdom thus. This is not mine. This I am not. This is not myself. When one sees this thus that it really is with correct wisdom, one holds no more views concerning the past. When one holds no more views concerning the past, one holds no more views concerning the future. When one holds no more views concerning the future, one has no more stubborn craving. When one has no more stubborn craving, the mind becomes free from strong feelings towards form, feeling, perception, volition, formations, and consciousness, and is liberated from the taints by non-clinging. By being liberated, the mind is steady. By being steady, the mind is content. By being content, one is not agitated. Being unagitated, one personally attains Nibbana, enlightenment. One understands, destroyed is birth. The holy life has been lived. What had to be done has been done. There is no more for this state of existence. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Vibhav. Arvind, talk about a perfect discourse for you after the question that you just asked. This is so perfect for you. This is one that we've actually studied other times in this group learning program, or this Pali Canon and English study group, where the Buddha is helping you first to be able to understand that the five aggregates are impermanent. And this is very important, as we were talking earlier, because the mind craves permanence. And you need to be able to see that all of these five aggregates are impermanent. And then whenever there is impermanence and the mind craves permanence, that is going to produce discontentedness, right? And now when the mind is experiencing discontentedness, you need to understand that is not yourself, right? Because somebody might say, I am angry. I am frustrated. No, that's not actually true. What is happening is that the mind is experiencing anger, or the mind is frustrated. It's not I that am angry or frustrated. It's the mind experiencing this. And this is a helpful distinction so that you don't adopt that as who you are, that I am angry. And now the mind wants to hold on to that anger. No, that's not true. So these discontent feelings that you experience, whether they're pleasant, painful, or neither painful nor pleasant, it's important not to identify with that as who you are as a person. Someone might say, I am shy. I am a shy person. No, you're not. You're just having personal existence view. That pollution is in the mind. And if you eradicate that personal existence view, this being will no longer experience shyness within the mind, right? So it's important not to adopt these discontent feelings as who you are. That's what the Buddha is saying, is what is discontentedness is non-self. This isn't who you are. What is non-self should be seen as it really is with correct wisdom. Thus, this is not mine. This I am not. this is not myself. So none of these things are myself. It's not who you are as a person. They're just conditioned experiences. That's all they are. That's why the Buddha opens up with this, that all we're experiencing is a conditioned experience that is arising, changing, and fading away. But the mind's going to crave for that to be permanent. Then it's going to experience discontentedness. It's going to adopt these things as who you think you are. And you need to be able to see that none of this is you. It's not who you are. Now, as you're starting to see that with correct wisdom, you stop holding on to these views concerning the past. Oftentimes, this is what the mind's doing, is it's clinging to the past, wanting to find some significance in the past about what I'm experiencing today. Well, the past is in the past. We can look at the past, particularly in this life, and look at the unwise decisions that we've made and cultivate wisdom to do those things better. And we can also look at the wise decisions we made in the past and learn to continue to make those wise decisions. But clinging to the past and being worried about it, holding on to it, this is not going to be beneficial for you at all. And when you don't cling and hold on to the past, then the mind learns to not cling and hold on to the future, where you're longing, yearning, and worried and having anxiety about the future. So when you're not clinging to the past and you're not clinging to the future, then there's no more of this stubborn craving where the mind's longing, yearning. It comes into the present moment and realizes that what you're really facing is something in the present moment. You can't change the past. You can't dictate the future, but you can make wise decisions in the present moment. But if you're craving and longing, yearning, and clinging to the past or the future, you won't be focused on the present moment. You need to be able to focus on the present moment. And that's what's going to help you to be able to observe the mind, see the longing, yearning, see the craving, and train the mind to cut that off and let it go. And when there's no more stubborn craving in the mind becomes free, right? There's freedom from these strong feelings towards the five aggregates, that the mind is no longer craving and clinging, identifying with these five aggregates as who you are, wanting them to be permanent. Then that's where the mind becomes liberated by the taints or from the taints, where the mind is no longer experiencing the pollution of the mind. And now being liberated from the pollutions or the defilements or the taints through non-clinging, now the mind experiences enlightenment. And here, this is where the Buddha is starting to explain the qualities of enlightenment. Sometimes people say that the Buddha never describes enlightenment, that enlightenment is undescribable. Well, that is true for someone who's not enlightened. But for someone who's enlightened, they can describe it very clearly. So the Buddha is saying, being liberated, the mind is steady, right? The mind's steady, it's stable, it's unshakable. And now when the mind's steady and stable and unshakable, it's content in the present moment. It's no longer yearning and longing for the past or the future. It's content in the present moment. And now being content in the present moment is not agitated. There's no frustration or irritation or annoyance. It doesn't matter what's going on. The mind's completely peaceful and joyful. There's no agitation whatsoever. Being unagitated, one attains enlightenment. And you're going to notice that's the case for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, that the mind's completely unaffected, that your mind is joyful and cheerful and uplifted. You're not indifferent to what's going on in the world, but you're not craving and longing, yearning, and worried and having anxiety and stress about all the things that are going on in the world either. Your mind's in the middle. You understand all of these things that are happening in the world. There's causes and conditions that are producing them. It's the natural law of karma. So being unagitated and being completely content in the present moment, being unaffected by what's going on in the world, oftentimes when people hear that, they think indifference, because that's what the unenlightened mind understands. It understands longing, yearning, and chasing, and it understands this other side of indifference and sluggishness and the lethargic condition. But that's not the middle way. The middle way is that one can experience this enlightened mental state where it's completely unagitated by what's going on in the world, because by the time you fully awake to get to final knowledge and you understand the natural laws, you can see the world's functioning exactly the way that the Buddha taught, that nothing is occurring based in random things or good luck or bad luck or destiny or fate or any of these other things. You can see that the world is functioning exactly the way that the Buddha explained it. So this is why you're unagitated and not frustrated. You're also not out there trying to change the world, because you understand that the world functions based on these natural laws, and each individual person needs to decide for themselves to improve and change. where oftentimes when people are stressed and having anxiety about what's going on in the world, they will run out in the world and try to change other people and think that that's how they're going to get to peace and joy. Or they'll be all the way on the other side where they're indifferent and they could care less, where there's this middle way where you can just understand the world's functioning the way it's intended to function, and you can be at ease because you have the knowledge and the wisdom to see that this is occurring. And now when the mind attains enlightenment, where it's completely peaceful, joyful, that the mind isn't experiencing any discontentedness whatsoever, you will also understand that you're not going to experience any rebirth. Because by the time you get to enlightenment, you would have independently verified dependent origination, and you would know that teaching, and you would know that by having attained enlightenment and purified the mind, getting to this unconditioned mental state, that not only is the mind peaceful, serene, and content with joy, but you're no longer going to experience rebirth because the causes and conditions that produce that have been eliminated from the mind. So you'll understand that there's no longer any rebirth, that this holy life has been lived. Sure, you did things that were unwise in the past, but now you've purified your mind and you're living this holy life, meaning your mind's completely purified. You're no longer making any unwise decisions. What had to be done has been done. You've trained your mind. You did it. You got to enlightenment, right? What had to be done had to be done. And there's no more for this state of existence, that you will live out the rest of this life, but at the end of this life, there isn't going to be any rebirth. And you will have the confirmation of that through the condition of your mind, that you will see that that's the case, that your mind's completely peaceful and joyful, and you'll have confirmed it through all the teachings that the Buddha shares. So let me know what questions you guys have here on this chapter. Remember, you can put that into Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, or you can raise your hand in Zoom and ask any questions that you like. Okay, it looks like Arvind has a question. Go ahead, sir.
Teacher David, I need to ask you from a practical standpoint. I understand that being in the present moment is key towards experiencing peace and joy. But, let's say the mind, because of its natural tendency to assess risk or it has certain fears of the future, it starts to project its thoughts upon the future, and that causes anxiety. How does one balance being prepared and taking precautions with actual staying in the moment and being content with what is in the present moment? How does one balance the two?
Yeah, what you do is eliminate craving and clinging. So when we talk about being in the present moment, it doesn't mean that you never think about the future, right? You can make plans. You can think about the future. You can plan for retirement. Like I know you have a young child, Arvind. You can plan for your child's growth and development and things like this. There's no harm in planning any of that stuff. But it's when you're clinging to it and you're craving it to be a certain way that now you will have anxiety and stress. So when we talk about being in the present moment, it means like making decisions in the present moment, right? Keeping your mind focused on a certain task, having singleness of mind. But in the present moment, you could be planning for 10 years from now. But if you plan for 10 years from now, don't cling to that, because there's a lot of impermanence between now and 10 years that if you cling to any of these things that you've planned 10 years from now, when you're getting closer and closer to it and it's not going to happen the way that you had planned it, that's where the stress and anxiety comes in. So the way that you get to the contentedness in the present moment is, yes, plan for the future, but then don't cling to it, and understand that as impermanence happens, you're going to need to update your decisions and modify your decisions. Okay. I don't see any other questions anywhere. All right. So is there someone who would like to read this? Oh, this is the Eightfold Path. That's right. So chapter 140 here in the book is the Eightfold Path. This is something that I teach in all the foundational classes and courses and retreats and all those different things. And I go through this thoroughly. It takes me about 2.5 hours to teach it. And then it shows up a few times throughout all the rest of the book series. And whenever it does, I just pause here and see if anybody has any questions about the Eightfold Path, because you need to deeply commit this to your memory. If you don't have this committed to your memory, you would never be able to practice it. So you're going to need to remember each one of these factors and commit it to your memory. And sometimes students like to get together with their teacher and independently confirm that they actually have committed it to their memory by just essentially like you're teaching the teacher, and then now we can help you to be able to confirm that you've understood it through you using your memory to describe it. So because it takes so long to teach it, and students who are in this program typically have already studied it, I just pause here rather than reading it to be able to see if you have any questions that you would like to ask. Because this is a teaching that you learn it, you reflect on it, you practice it, you learn it some more, you reflect on it, you practice it, you learn it some more, reflect on it, practice. You need to dial it in closer and closer. So like that question Arvind just asked is like a type of question that would come up that if you're practicing the Eightfold Path, the Buddha doesn't necessarily explain what I just explained to Arvind, but he gives you all the tools, the kind of rudimentary tools to really get to enlightenment through the Eightfold Path. But then there's applying these tools in day-to-day life that you need the guidance from a teacher. And that's why you would need the guidance from a teacher. You wouldn't be able to figure this out on your own. So let me know if you guys have any questions about the Eightfold Path at all. Some of you guys have studied it with me. Many of you have. But if you haven't, I suggest you go back into our first book, Volume 1, Chapter 4 and 5. That's where I share it. You can also see the recorded videos and podcasts and things like this where I've also taught this in depth. And then, of course, I'm teaching this all the time in the various live classes and retreats that I share. Okay, I'm not seeing any questions anywhere. So what I'm going to do here is just end by thanking all of you guys for joining. Thank you for your interest to learn and grow and develop on the path to enlightenment. Next week, we're going to be in chapters 141 through 148. We've been in this book for quite a while, several months, and now we're going to come to an end on that. And then we're going to ultimately go into volume 12, which is titled Lowly Arts. So if you guys would like to read these next 8 chapters, then we're going to explore those and study them next week. In our group learning program tomorrow, which is Sunday at 9 a.m. and 9 p.m., I'm going to be in chapter 11 of this book, Developing a Life Practice, The Path That Leads to Enlightenment. This chapter is titled Meditation, Developing Your Practice. This is where I teach all the ins and outs of the 4 types of meditations that the Buddha taught. He only ever taught 4. There's probably hundreds and thousands of meditations out there in the world now. And if you tried to actually learn all of those, which they're not created by the Buddha, in some cases, they could actually take you in the opposite direction of enlightenment. And it would really stretch you thin, because if you were trying to learn 50 or 100 meditations, you wouldn't be able to get very deep in any one particular meditation. So there's only 4 that you would ever really need to know. And by focusing on what the Buddha actually taught and learning these 4, you can get really deep into those. So I'm going to be exploring these tomorrow in the group learning program at 9 a.m. and 9 p.m. through our group learning program. And then on Sundays, we're starting to have a meditation at the temple. So if you'd like to join here in Chiang Mai at Wat Thong Yu on Sundays at 6:30 p.m. or 9 p.m., I'm teaching at the temple now instead of at home. You're welcome to join in the temple at Wat Thong Yu here in Chiang Mai for 6:30 meditation, and then 9 p.m. I teach the group learning program in the classroom. So thank you all for joining for our classes. And if there's anything that you need my help for, just feel free to reach out. I'm here to help all of you guys. Take care and be well. Have a very wonderful and lovely rest of your day. We'll see you next time. Sawadee ka. Thank you again for watching. Enjoy your meditation. Look forward to seeing you online and answering any questions that you might have. Thank you so much.